Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's a Ukraine War News Update. Technically, that normally would be my first one of the day. I did a Geopolitics one as a leftover from yesterday, but this is my hits and losses video that most people watch across my channel. This is the bigger of the videos. And we are going to start with the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. Some interesting figures across these categories. 1,030 is the lower end of the high numbers of personnel that have been lost every day since the Kharkiv offensive was started on, May the 10th now. So 1,030, still above 1,000, still a huge number, but less than the sort of 1,200s we have been seeing. 9 tanks, about average there. That has been up and down like a yo-yo. We've had 23 armoured personnel vehicles taken out yesterday, just above average. 48 artillery systems, at least double average there. And 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems. So fairly useful figures across those stats. 84 vehicles and fuel tanks is phenomenal. I wonder how many of those are Bukankers, sort of Scooby-Doo vans, how many are golf carts and motorcycles and quads and whatnot. But anyway, very high number of vehicles and fuel tanks and 8 pieces of special equipment. So pretty good day for the Ukrainians, even if personnel is slightly lower than normal. We're going to speak a bit about personnel going forward, but we'll go to Andrew Perpetua's loss list that's just come out. And we can see that there's probably about 1.5 to 1 Russian to Ukrainian loss advantage there, or loss ratio, sorry, with combat assets only marginally more Russian combat assets taken out than Ukrainians. It's just a lot more of the civilian vehicles and ATVs and trucks and whatnot that the Russians have lost. So if we look at the Ukrainian losses, 3 howitzers, 5 tanks, T-64s and others. We've got 3 IFVs. All of these pretty much have been damaged, bar sort of 1 tank and 1 artillery system. Couple abandoned, but Bradley damaged there, another one. And then I was listening to someone yesterday that was saying the feedback from the front line is that the Ukrainians really like the Bradley, and so they're using them lots. They're just much better. So I've been talking about chomping through their older Soviet era kit, which is happening, right? But also, it might be a case of, okay, we do have BMPs that we could use, but why would we use a BMP? And this is a question I had nearer the beginning of the counteroffensive in May last year, where you're like, okay, why have we not seen the Challenger 2 tanks? Surely these are pretty good tanks. Why are we keeping on seeing T-64s and T-72s? And there's a tension between, well, do we use the very best tank we can, like an Abrams, to go and do stuff? But then we risk losing that, and then that's a bit of a PR loss. Well, what's the point in having them? So there's a tension between using the best and losing the best, right? But Bradleys, as long as they've got a pretty consistent supply of Bradleys, I think you're going to see them, not only because they have chomped through a lot of their older stuff, but also it's just a better thing to use. You're going to want to use that on the front lines as opposed to some, very poor cousin in a kind of BMP 1 or something. So, yeah, that's why we're seeing lots of Bradleys, no doubt. Okay. Moving on to Russian losses, another Tor M2 damaged there from the Gimlers. That's an air defense system, surveillance and comms equipment, some D30 howitzers, some quite a lot of tanks on the list here. T-72s, tracked garden shed. It's interesting from, is it War Spotting saying, or was it Oryx saying over 100 T-90Ms have now been lost, and that's a bit of a benchmark, bit of a landmark figure for T-90Ms, their best tanks. But anyway, none on the list here today. Couple of infantry fighting vehicles and some APCs, number of trucks, a lot of Golf buggies, Desert Cross 1000-3s, and a lot of destroyed civilian vehicles. But as far as destroyed against damaged, it's a lot of damaged and abandoned but actually both the Russian and Ukrainian combat assets. So interesting there. But nothing too crazy for either side, but Russia losing, possibly losing an air defense system, just a lot of that a lot of those civilian vehicles, and Desert Cross 1000. So again, the question is, are they using them because they have no other option? Are they running out of equipment such that they are using more? You can see down here, 4 motorcycles lost, they're destroyed. 4 motorcycles and 7 golf buggies and 1 quad, they are using those a lot to attack. We saw some footage yesterday of actual attacks. Now, using that kind of equipment. Now, Trentenenko says, so a Russian infantry regiment goes in with 1,200 people, and in 7 days there are 100% casualties. This is going back to the huge losses that Russia had been taking, particularly since the Kharkiv offensive started. And actually, this is with reference to a Chris Wiki thread. Chris Wiki then goes on to say, RUSI, Royal United Services Institute, estimates they're losing 1,200 people, a full battalion, every single day. I mean, that's just unsustainable losses, right? Okay, Chris Owicki thread here. Russia's war effort in Ukraine is still hampered by lying commanders, corrupt bureaucrats, an ineffective military-industrial complex, a lack of defences against drones, and chronic shortages of man and equipment, according to the Russian journalist and military commentator Vladislav Shurgin. An ultra-nationalist journalist and commentator on Russian military affairs. He's written a lengthy complaint on his Telegram channel about the state of the Russian war effort. He says it is leading to massive and unnecessary losses on the Russian side. After castigating the indifference of officials and the man on the street, who he says is waiting for friend Trump to give the order to end the war. If you don't understand, my fellow supporters of Ukraine out there who might also be Trump supporters, the Russians are wanting Trump to win. Why do they want both the man on the street and the propagandist, and I would say Putin, want Trump to win? Why is that? Why do you think that is the case? He complains that, quote, any initiative, any business drowns without a trace in the bureaucratic swamp. The average official, he says, doesn't give a damn about anything except his own pocket, his own chair, and the will of his superior. What official in our country thinks about the country? Country is something abstract, but the office, the boss, and corporate solidarity are everything, he says. The Russian military's culture of lying in military reports has led to the mass slaughter of Russian soldiers, according to Shurgin. 2.5 years into the war, and at the front lines, lies and show-offs are still blooming like opium poppies in a Tajik vegetable garden. Some gentlemen commanders are already receiving their third medal for the villages and townships taken on paper, and they get away with it. How many dozens of times has Krinky been declared captured and cleared of the enemy? A full-fledged commander, let's not say which troops, personally reported to the president of Russia about its capture back in the spring. And the point is, it was only 3 weeks ago that fighters on the front line confirmed that the enemy is no longer in Krinky. How many times was Robotina liberated? How many times have they reported that Klishchivka is ours 150%? But the worst thing is that then, in these taken places of Krinky, Klishchivka, Robotina, hundreds of Russian men are driven forward to slaughter, so that the boss who reports a capture, who has already drilled a hole for the medal on his uniform, can cover his ass. I don't think he's saying quote. This problem of institutionalized lying in the Russian military is well known and has been the cause of many failures on the battlefield. See the thread below for a longer discussion. That is Chris Wiki saying that. So that's the Vranyo that we've talked about so many times. Anyway, back to Shurigin, who complains that, quote, our regiments are ground down to zero in a week in senseless head-on assaults and without any results. Because there is no electronic warfare, no drones, and the ammunition is limited. And how many regiments do we have with a full list of personnel who, but as soon as the command comes to attack, to go forward, and the task is assigned to a full-blooded regiment, it suddenly turns out that a quarter of the payroll is dead souls, non-existent people. So, and we heard about this yesterday, I think from a different source. Some are on the run, some have not returned from vacation, and some have generally paid their way out of the front and are safely sitting in the rear. Thanks, Ivan, for that cup of tea. Amazing. And then there are no further miracles. The regiment is marking time, senselessly losing people and equipment. As a result, it exposes the flanks of its more successful neighbours, and from a beautifully conceived offensive, it turns out to be a furious offensive, with a week-long battle for the forester's hut and huge losses. Ukraine's omnipresent kamikaze reconnaissance and long-range drones are another critical problem, which Shurigin says that Russia is failing to counter or imitate effectively. Quote, for a whole year, drones have been keeping the infantry from raising their heads, chasing every cart in the swarm, and for a whole year, we have been hearing stories from military officials that, quote, at any minute now, soon, this problem will be solved. But so far, at the front, they see people's electronic warfare products made by enthusiasts far more often than effective products of the state military industrial complex. Chris Owicki adds, as noted in the thread below, drones produced by the military industrial complex have often been expensive and of poor quality, while volunteer efforts to send drones to the troops fighting in Ukraine have been obstructed by the authorities. Anyway, according to Shurigin, the Russian war effort is heavily reliant on volunteers and self-purchased supplies. He writes that cars, motorbikes, quad bikes and other means of transport are being purchased for the front, along with many other kinds of equipment. Up to the present moment, most of the drone detectors are bought by fighters with their own money. There is still a continuous stream of volunteer cars going to the front, carrying sights, thermal imagers, Mavic drones, camouflage nets, first aid kits, generators, and a whole list of desperately needed equipment to the front line. Even now, in folk workshops, assembly of FPV drones is going on day and night. The military-industrial complex has failed to produce the kind of drones that are actually needed, according to Shurigin, and has focused instead on producing expensive, unwanted hardware. Quote, in 29 months of war, state corporations have not created a single transport drone capable of delivering supplies to the front lines and picking up the wounded. Enthusiasts did, even flying hexacopters, but there's no money to produce them. But what we have seen a lot of stories with clumsy, slow-moving machine gun modules, which are obsolete in the era of Rogozhin's reign in the military-industrial complex when they actually appeared, costing many millions and needed by no one. Shurigin laments the lack of defences against Ukrainian long-range drones, and he says have been, quote, been the scourge of border and non-border regions, wrecking oil depots and industrial facilities every day. He asks why there are no airborne-only warning balloons. He also queries the lack of activity by the Russian Air Force against the long-range drone threat and the lack of protective facilities at Russian airfields, which have enabled Ukraine to destroy aircraft on the ground. Something I've wondered, actually, I've only seen one bit of footage of a Russian jet inside Russia shooting down a drone. Just one. And how many drones have we seen strike their targets? Anyway, to continue, quote, we have been saying for 2 years that the war requires the restoration of air defence forces, the return of fighter aviation to air defence, to no avail. The commander-in-chief of the Air Force Defence Forces is deaf. So what about the fact that every month the number of enemy drones grows, but our Kinzhals, hypersonic missiles, are accurate and our missiles are fast? For 2 years, we have been saying that our airfields need protective structures, shelters for aircraft and main airfield facilities, and nothing. And we are waiting for another drone attack or another airfield with an epic video from the air view of burning Russian bombers. So Shurigin calls the current moment, quote, a very dangerous point in the war when Russia will either mobilize and crush the enemy or fall into a bottomless swamp of truce due to the weight of our systematic problems, bureaucratic sluggishness, indifference and apathy. So that's a really damning indictment of the situation for the Russians at the moment on the front line with regards to particularly drones, but meat assaults and personnel losses, etc., etc. Let's add another anecdote to that. Russian soldiers in Kharkiv's Vovchansk are turning against their commanders, facing severe challenges including high casualties, troop shortages and the deployment of wounded soldiers, leading to refusals to fight and near revolts within the ranks. And Anton Gerashchenko reports that a Slovak chap, Yaroslav Galichik, claims that he is the only survivor of his group of foreign mercenaries who fought on Russia's side. He threw away his assault rifle and went to surrender when he heard a Ukrainian speech nearby. And you can go and watch that. All these will be linked below. That's like a 4.5 minute interview there of that POW. Things, we mustn't be too positive here because things are really tough for the Ukrainians. And actually, the US is still putting a stop on weapons being used across the border in a way that the Ukrainians really need. And that's super, super frustrating. But there are signs that Russia is just, they are taking unsustainable losses that are just too problematic for them, surely, going forward. In fact, the UK intelligence report today says the average daily Russian casualties killed and wounded in Ukraine throughout May and June this year increased to conflict highs of 1,262 and 1,163 respectively. In total, Russia likely lost, killed and wounded in excess of 70,000 personnel over the past 2 months. The uptick in losses reflects Russia's opening of the new front in the Kharkiv region while maintaining the same rate of offensive operations along the remainder of the front. Although this new approach has increased the pressure of the front line and effective Ukrainian defense, and a lack of Russian training reduces Russia's ability to exploit any tactical successes, despite attempting to stretch the front line further. Russia's casualty rate will likely continue to average above 1,000 a day over the next 2 months as Russia continues to try to overmatch Ukrainian positions with mass. And of course, this, leads to the old adage, you defeat mass with precision. So as long as Ukraine have the right weapons, they can overcome these massive attacks. And the Russians do seem to be losing at ratios that are, particularly in the personnel department at the moment, that are to the advantage of the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are having a really difficult time, particularly on the Eastern Front. And also, we're going to talk about this in a while, the weather is insanely hot at the moment, and that is presenting quite a problem for both sides. But yeah, so just the numbers are not looking good for Russia. Right, moving on to distant strikes. Ukrainian air defense shot down 5 out of 5 Kh-101 missiles. So that's good news that those missiles, like those that successfully got through into Kiev, all 5 were shot down. 11 out of 19 Shahed drones. So that's not the best interception rate, although it says 8 Shaheds were lost from radar. So it could be that they were shot down by, or electronic warfare, or they weren't noted, or they disappeared from radar because they went and hit their target. So who knows? But it appears that the main threat of Russia's attack came against Starokonstantinov, so the airbase there in Khmelnytsky. All 5 of the missiles were down, so that's good. But yeah, here Tim White says actually Ukraine says none of the other 8 reached their target. So actually that's all 19, if you believe the Ukrainian General Staff. All 19 drones were taken out, 11 shot down, and 8, I presume then, electronic warfare. Smoke was seen in the Belbek area from the Omega beach in occupied Crimea yesterday. Before smoke appeared, there was a noise followed by an explosion. So something was struck inside Crimea, as is pretty much always the case. And actually, when we look at no reports, it's just general thread explosions. This is right now, 32 minutes ago, in Mariupol near the airport. Sirens and military units were turned on in the occupied Sevastopol. Missile strikes on the occupied peninsula are possible there. So there will be activity taking place today. No doubt with missiles. In a village in the Kharkiv region, a bomb has hit a grain storage facility. So that is a shame. That will affect obviously supply of food in that region. Now we're going to go to other bits and pieces, and we're going to talk a lot about how Ukraine are constricted in their usage of NATO-supplied, Western-supplied weapons. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg saying the right to self-defense includes also the right to strike legitimate targets, military targets, on the territory of the aggressor, Russia. Therefore, allies have reduced the restrictions on the use of weapons delivered to Ukraine. So this is the right kind of rhetoric that we were expecting and hoping for. But what actually happened? Well, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like the memo got to the US or Germany. Germany does not support allowing Ukraine to attack more targets in Russia, despite pressure from Ukraine and allies like the Netherlands. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz believes such relaxations are unnecessary. Really, Scholz? Really? I don't understand how Germany doing such a good job of providing all sorts of stuff, and yet they say things. Scholz says things like that. Jake Sullivan, your White House man here, who is anti-escalatory, says this.
And we saw the horrific reality of Russia's brutality with the attack on the Children's Hospital in Kyiv just a few days ago. And we are working with the Ukrainians to deal with that attack and to respond with force and vigor. From our own production, and we saw...
Respond with force and vigor, with strength and determination. So that, you would think, that gives permission for Ukraine to strike at Russia or for restrictions to be reduced. But I don't know, because then you have this from Jake Sullivan. The USA has not changed its position regarding long-range strikes on the territory of Russian Federation and with American weapons. This was stated by White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, quote, "We made our position clear, which is, we have a common sense policy about cross-border strikes when Russia is attacking from the other side of the border. We've seen that play out in Kharkiv. It could potentially play out in other areas of that border like in Sumy, but we have not authorized the use of ATACMS for deep strikes into Russia, and I don't have any announcements for you all today," he said. And then, we also heard, I talked about this in the last video, that the UK, that supposedly, because Zelensky said yesterday, "I held my first meeting with the new UK Prime Minister Starmer. I thank Prime Minister Starmer for all UK's military and financial assistance provided to our country. This morning, I learned about the permission to use Storm Shadow missiles against military targets in Russian territory. Today, we had the opportunity to discuss a practical implementation of this decision." And it was, the words were important because it looked like the UK was just... So I talked about this yesterday morning, how you could read that both ways. It could be just continuing the Conservative government's approach. And I think the word defensively or defensive use of Storm Shadows was used. And I said yesterday that either this has been misinterpreted by Zelensky or this is great and the UK have given permission to use missiles deep into Russia. Well, apparently UK MOD has today come out and clarified that the UK hasn't allowed Ukraine to use Storm Shadow missiles inside Russia. Now, two options there. So one option is that that's what they said originally and Zelensky misinterpreted it, or the UK did say that they could use them deep and the US has come along and said, "No, that ain't happening. We are not allowing that." So either like components in the Storm Shadow from America and they get some say of that, or just generally like, we are in charge of this and you ain't doing that. We're having a NATO consistency here that we're all going to be singing off the same song sheet. So I don't know personally. Either of those are plausible to me. My guess is surely. Well, I say either are plausible, like there's no change, but surely the British would be up for allowing Storm Shadow to be used like that. So I don't know. Maybe it is a Sullivan thing, more likely. And that was what I was going to say as well. Is that when I heard this morning, the first thing I thought was that I bet you that Ukraine are working on a missile to be able to do this, either to launch from a plane or from HIMARS or something. So the key for Ukraine is to be able to functionally do those things, but with their own indigenous weaponry, right? So you've been trying to create that Neptune missile that can do that. I don't know about production at scale. And here you're thinking, right, possibly the US are saying you can't do this because imminently there is, this is like the fingers crossed moment for me. This is a bit of hopium that imminently there will be a Ukrainian missile that actually does do that. And then so it's from Max 24. I don't know the provenance, unfortunately, often doesn't give you the source. But the US Air Force is targeting development of a new class of air-launched precision munition for Ukraine, according to Aviation Week. Extended range attack munition, range of 460 kilometers, speed 735 kilometers. But then if they can't use ATACMS, they won't be able to use these, surely. But it depends whether this is development within Ukraine with the help of the US, so that they're producing these missiles themselves. I don't know. But I just hope that they are going to be able to hit those air bases soon, because they really desperately need to. And then this kind of spills over into aircraft. So again, Max 24 says the Western countries, quote, this is a quote from the MOD, the Dutch MOD, the Western countries that handed over F-16s to Ukraine are conducting negotiations on their possible use on Russian territory. Prime Minister of the Netherlands promised Zelensky that his country would not impose any restrictions on the use of aircraft. So I think this is again the US stepping in and saying that, no, you can't use F-16s that we've made to strike inside Russia. You've got the Dutch Prime Minister here being very clear.
President Zelensky said that Ukraine needs at least 100 and...
Danish.
28 fighter jets. So as Denmark is leading so-called air coalition, do you see the potential among your partners in terms of readiness, providing more aircraft than already promised?
I hope so, and I think President Zelensky is right. When we look at the numbers of fighter jets in Russia, it's very big and it's used now directly in Ukraine. And therefore, the flights we are able to donate will not be enough. That's one of the reasons why we have built an international F-16 coalition. And with that, of course, we hope for more donations, more countries to support with donations and also with training of pilots and so on.
Denmark is among the countries that allows strikes by its fighter jets on Russian territory. Do you mean the entire Russian territory or its part bordering with Ukraine?
You cannot put that question and expect a simple answer because it all depends on the circumstances. It has to be according to international law, but it is possible also to reach targets outside Ukraine, yes.
Why do we see that some allies are still fearing of so-called escalation? How does that fit in with the goal to prevent Russia from winning in Ukraine?
I have to say I do not accept the premise of escalation because there is only one part that is responsible for everything that's going on in Ukraine, and that's Russia. They could end this war today. They could end it immediately. And Ukraine has the right to protect itself, but it also has the obligation to protect itself. And the same goes for the rest of Europe. We have to protect our continent, our values, and our people. And therefore we have to not only to defend Ukraine, but also to defeat the Russians.
Prime Minister.
Why can't any other national leader like Olaf Scholz, like Joe Biden, like Keir Starmer, say something as clearly as that? Which is absolutely brilliant. Like, yeah, okay, we've got to work within humanitarian rules, international rules, but actually, yeah, they should be able to strike. You know, they're defending themselves. They've got an obligation to do that. We're going to help them. And in fact, we're going to go and talk about her later, because they've also, the Danish, or she has given up all of their air defences, is the announcement. They've already given all of their artillery to Ukraine. Now, apparently, they're going to give all of their air defences. I mean, Denmark, for all of my Danish viewers out there, legendary, absolutely legendary. And she is, like, telling it how it is. That's really good. Good questioning as well, just getting straight to the point. Let's have this out. I think people give, people like John Kirby and Sullivan an absolute buy. Without, like, you know, when you ask a question, they give you those kind of anti-escalation answers. Then you've got to drill. I don't know if you're allowed to ask secondary questions at those presses, but yeah. Right, according to the New York Times, Ukraine is not ready for a counterattack in 2024 due to slow deliveries of Western weapons. Well, it was never going to be anyway. As the publication notes, delivery of the aid promised by the NATO summit will take weeks, if not months. I mean, if you remember, Keir Starmer's just said, we're going to expedite the stuff that was promised by the UK, goodness knows when, right? And we're going to speed it up so it gets there within 100 days. Well, that's 3 bleeding months still, and that was stuff that was promised like way back when. So these things do take time, and it's not. Yes, there might be an element of slowness in the system, but also you have to get this stuff ready. So a lot of the equipment that's being given is so in the UK's case is probably old tracked vehicles that need to be overhauled before you send them out, and make sure that you aren't just giving a load of crap that can't be used. It's no use to the Ukrainians. It falls apart on day one, and then no spare parts. So there evidently will require a lot of time before you know, between promising stuff and getting it to the Ukrainians. So yeah, as the publication notes, delivery will take weeks, if not months, and some of the announced weapons have not even been purchased or produced yet. The Pentagon predicts that the Ukrainian armed forces will be on the defensive for at least 6 months without significant success. I broadly believe that as well, but I think there will be success. The success will come in the metrics of Russian losses. Anyway, GPS jamming in Finland is likely part of Russian hybrid campaign. The ISW, Institute for the Study of War, said recent cases of GPS blocking in and near Finland are likely part of Russia's intensifying hybrid campaign against directly targeting NATO. And I think stuff like that is just bad news for Russia, because it gives NATO more ammunition, more rationale to be more robust with reacting against Russia. The more that Russia does things that are obviously against NATO, the more NATO will be able to, you know, change restrictions and have good rationale for, you know, pressuring the US to say, look, you need to allow Ukraine to strike these air bases. Look, it's obvious that Russia are doing X, Y, and Z. Look at what they're doing here. Look at what they're doing there. Assassination attempt of Armin Parpiga. Russian pilot has leaked personnel data on Russian aviation division to Ukraine, according to the Kyiv Independent. A Russian pilot passed on confidential information to Ukraine's military intelligence, and that helped identify 30 commanders of the Russian heavy bomber aviation division, a source of the agency told Kyiv Independent. Quote, he was shot by the attack on the children's hospital, so he decided to hand over to the Ukrainian side documents related to the activities of his military unit, as well as private photos of the command staff, the source said. And indeed, the photos come out, I've seen one with numbers over all of them, so yeah, it's not been confirmed officially, but it appears like this is good news, really. He decided to hand over the Ukrainian side documents related to the activity of the military unit, as well as private photos of commanders of the 22nd Heavy Bomber Aviation Division of the Russian Federation, as he was so annoyed with that hospital strike. 21-year-old woman, because this is what freedom looks like in Russia. A 21-year-old woman has been jailed for treason in Russia. What was her crime? She gave $30 to Ukraine. Tatiana Lalatina from Tomsk was arrested in February. Details of her case and June's trial are only just emerging. The artist was given a 9-year sentence. $30 to Ukraine, 9-year sentence. And just to remind you that the weather is terrible, as in it's very nice, very good, very hot, but like super hot. Ukraine is currently enduring searing heat of up to 40 degrees actually. I saw a picture yesterday of a car dashboard that had melted in the heat in Ukraine. Record-breaking heat wave for weeks on end. Second warmest July ever recorded globally. Russian soldiers are complaining about their excessively hot uniforms. Russian mill blogger Volt 8, a serving soldier, writes on Telegram, in Ukraine we gained experience of war in a hot, sometimes especially hot climate. This applies to everything: increased consumption of drinking water and more frequent washing. And of course, water is in short supply, so this can be an issue. Hygiene and prevention of infectious epidemics, typhus, cholera, and the like. Timely evacuation of the bodies of the dead. Ventilation of premises. Heating the casings of unburied mines. Glowing in the thermal imager. Overheating of electric generators. Frequent boiling of car engines. Burns from the sun and hot metal. And of course, wearing more summer appropriate clothing. For example, the use of socks, slippers, rolled up uniform trousers and t-shirts in the rear should be legalized. It is unbearable to fry in a VKPO all season field uniform kit jacket in 35 plus degree heat, as required by the proponents of the permitted appearance, who check the lives of soldiers. Green khaki shorts should also be legalized as work clothes. It's so simple to allow by personal order of the commander responsible for any location working in shorts, even those purchased at one's own expense. Legalized wearing Panama hats along with baseball caps. So, Russians complaining that they're not allowed to wear things that would make life easier in these record-breaking heats. Anyway, that's enough from me. Hopefully that was useful and interesting. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate your support. Thank you to Dave Davis, who was super kind today, and to Mark and Olena, who are always really kind. You guys are legends. I hope you're well. Take care, everybody, and speak soon.